How's it going, everybody? It is Wednesday the 24th, right? Yeah, okay. So, here we are, locally sourced. This is going to be a quicker stream today, just for the interest of time. Both Zach and I have somewhere we got to be soon. So, what we're going to do is we're basically just going to debrief the listening session last night. We got video of that, so we can kind of bounce back and take a look at certain parts if we want to get the wording right. And then there's a bunch of data that he and I just managed to get a look at, and we're gonna go over that as well. So with that, Zach, how are you today?
Doing well. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too, man. It's you know, it was an intense session last night. That was some really like, there was some hard stories in there.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't anticipate that those stories would come forward. Like, I had heard actually about most of those kind of by proxy and hadn't heard them directly from those voices. And I think what was interesting was, you know, it was advertised as this listening session, which obviously we can interpret what that means, but I think it was unclear that, or like, how do you have a listening session when you expect that the people of color in this community, or that anyone for that matter, should be coming forward with their police stories? Like, that wasn't, I don't think that was clear that that was the precedent, that people were supposed to offer their stories and then we respond to those so that the police listen to what is happening here. I kind of understood it as like, here's an open forum, let's have a conversation. But it sounds like they didn't quite set up that structure. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it. I think there was sort of like a lack of clarity on it. You know, it just in terms of, I mean, on the actual flyer itself, you know, it says ask your questions. I can try and pull it up here in a second, but it's just like, it's literally saying we have, you know, if you have questions, go ahead and ask them. And it's kind of like, okay, so we think we're probably going to get answers, rather than sort of like, now we make a statement at the end of this meeting. And like, you know, it's not, there was a certain degree of like, this isn't quite, it didn't have that gratifying feeling at the end that you like really want to have.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you and I kind of had in our personal conversation a discussion about like needing to pay attention to, in particular, you know, Chief Gennard's response, and also, you know, we've talked to him before, and my question at the onset of that meeting was, Chief Gennard, can you show us your heart? Like, what, like,
Right,
speak
yeah.
from a place of humanity and not just go back into your like legal definition of everything. And so I think it was pretty disappointing that he resorted to that at the end of the meeting. I know it, and he did say, you know, it's a lot to digest, and I don't want to downplay that at all. And he's chewing off a lot, but it's just interesting to me that there can't be that immediate sense of feeling. I mean, people were really like getting very vulnerable in that conversation.
Yeah, totally. And it, you know, it's like, I think they didn't have the, you know, I think about one of the previous like town meetings that they had, you know, within the select board meetings. And it was sort of like, I think it was actually when Chief Gennard was there, and, you know, I think Bill Kennedy asked if they had any complaints, and it was like, no, we've never gotten any complaints, formal or informal. And, you know, and I
Right.
think, you know, for us, it was like, well, we've all heard these complaints, you know, where are you guys at on that? And, you know, it's like watching that meeting, seeing you know, it's like, on the one hand, I had the speaker view on, so I could just see things better. But, you know, I sort of tick back to the Facebook Live and look at that, and you could see a lot of intense reactions from folks. You know, I I just like I feel like there were so many people that were just genuinely hearing those stories for the first time, especially people in town leadership. So my hope is that like increases the gravity of the situation for them, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it did. I think Karen Hatcher, I mean, she was pretty raw by the end of it. And and I know Karen to be someone who is attuned with what's going on, but I think like um, regardless of the structure of it, like had those stories not come forward, um, last night might not have been as impactful as it could have been. So like it's this weird dynamic of like I really don't think we need to be putting any more pressure on people of color right now to be coming forward with these stories. However, um, if they are not to be told, I think we kind of continue with business as usual.
Yeah.
And so I think the reaction from some of the select board, from Bill, from Karen, even Nicole, I think they were really moved in a new direction. And I think they really made clear their commitment to wanting to set out on a new path. I don't think they know what it is yet.
Right.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I know, but like, I don't think they have any clue. Like how we. I don't know. I want to give them more credit than that, but like, it seems to me that this is all kind of flying by the seat of our pants.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's. I think about that as being kind of like par for course in a way, because we don't know, like, how do you know something you don't know?
Yeah.
And I mean, and here I can actually jump to the clip right now of Karen talking about this, because it is like you can see just how intense it is for her. So we'll it so we know we've got the exact moment.
And thanks to everyone who spoke tonight. My heart hurts. There's so many places, so many people, I don't even know what to say. I just feel like I'm so sorry for those of you who have had the experiences you've had. It's heartbreaking and it's not right. So that's me personally saying that. My heart hurts tonight. But I also am hopeful because we are this community and we do have this ability to hear each other and to be in this conversation together. And I agree that this is an opportunity that is unique to the time we're living in. And so let us not miss it. If you do have other things you want to share, please do send an email to community@peterborough.nh.gov. I'm going to ask the chiefs if they want to make any comments.
Yeah, so I mean, like, that's, Karen's reaction is really, it's just weighted. You can hear it,
Yeah, I mean, she even says, this is from me personally, which, how often do you hear politicians step aside from their position and say, I'm a person, first of all,
right?
And this is my opinion. This isn't my constituents speaking. This is me.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean, and that's like, generally speaking, I think that's, I like, we tread this like strange line here where there's actual people in our leadership that are really good at listening and they genuinely care about us. And I think like what a lot of like, I feel like, and I don't mean to criticize, but like what I feel like a lot of younger folks are getting wrapped up in is what they're seeing, which is really horrible, which, it's very reasonable to get wrapped up in that. And I mean, I myself am guilty of it as well. But you also have to remember that we actually did a good job electing our officials here in town. So, and they're the people that we want to be in charge. So in that way, we don't have to go through, and we shouldn't have to go through an intense election process to get meaningful change implemented here. It's like these folks are good at listening, and they're going to be allies in this whole thing, as long as we respect them as people. So I always, it's like, I don't want to get into, we were to go say that now in like a major cities, any regular old leftist would call you a bootlicker, and that would be the end of it. But it's, I mean, and obviously there's like the serious problems of racism, like the stories that you hear from Emma or Grace, or Doug, and it's like, and I mean, like, we can get into those clips as well here, but I did want to sort of finish this off with, we'll let the Chiefs speak about it, and then the one thing I did ultimately want to get to, like, quickly too, is the and maybe actually, you know what, we'll save it for a different time, folks. I'll try and get these clipped out and up for folks so they can see it on the channel. But what I think we should probably do is, I do want to hop back in time on that clip to Ivy, because I think what she says is going to get us to the next part of this conversation. So there we go. Let's see here.
Of the police funds, but that we need to reallocate funds so that the police don't have to be everything for every incident, for everybody. And I guess one of the questions I have is for Chief Gennard: how much of what the Peterborough police spends their time doing, is it your sense that maybe could be handled? I mean, how much of it is lost dogs and, I don't know, drunk husbands that maybe could be handled by someone who's not an armed policeman? So that's a question for Scott.
What a legend.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, just hold on one second, Scott. You got to raise your hand to jump to the top of the list. We got 61 people here, so.
The other thing to remember is she's our state rep right now, one of the two. Like, that's what we've got. Let's see here. I feel like Chief Gennard takes a second to sort of get himself up.
Yeah.
And it was
It's
a little.
weird.
I found you, Scott. You can go ahead.
Yeah, it was hectic in there. Like,
I don't have the answer to that immediately, Ivy. I did speak to Karen, I believe through email as early as yesterday, running some numbers regarding how many calls we respond to where mental health is a factor. So as far as breaking down how much we spend in different areas, I don't have the immediate answer to that. That would take some time in working with our software. But that's something I will make a note of, and hopefully I'll have an answer for you soon.
yeah, I mean, my hope is that he doesn't stay too, like, removed from that. I mean, I do wish that he had sort of given us, like, well, what's your sense of it? You know what I mean? I think that's even what Ivy asked. What is your personal sense of this, rather than what are your numbers? And I know that it's easy to kind of go back and, like, lean on the numbers, but
Yeah, he started dealing in the very literal. And I think the point of this listening session was that these are the experiences and the actual, like, truth coming from your community that can't be remedied by throwing a figure at somebody.
Right, exactly. It's and I mean, I think what gets it to sort of this next bit is the numbers. NHPR just released budgets. I'm gonna head down this afternoon and check out what I've asked for to see if I see anything different or if it's the same stuff. I'd like to see something more granular than this, personally.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think we can get on to that, something else that I understand is that we need to look into, and I'll actually throw this up on the screen before I do the next piece, is something we should be aware of, and is the Law Enforcement Support Office, and it uses what's called the 1033 program. So, this says LESO is responsible for operating the 1033 program, or LESO program, where it transfers excess military equipment to civilian law enforcement agencies. The program requires the Department of Defense to make various items of equipment available to local law enforcement. So, and the thing about this is that they just give this stuff. Like, that's not a purchase. So it wouldn't show up in our budgets. You know what I mean? Like, we wouldn't necessarily know. So it's also something to consider when asking, like, hey, what kind of gear do you guys have? Did you get anything through this program? If so, what was it? You know what I mean? Like, this program has given like a lot of assault rifles to fishing game, or parks and rec. You know what I mean? Like national parks, and they just don't need those guns. You know what I mean? Like, you're talking like, things with like grenade launchers on them, and like that is just, there's no reason to it's not necessary.
Well, and I don't remember how long ago it was, but we had an armory building in Peterborough that's now the community center.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of, like, if I recall correctly, like, there were like sort of military grade vehicles there that were parked there pretty regularly. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like
I don't have the specifics on it, so we'd have to sort of like dig in on it. But yeah, I mean, I recall it as well. I mean, I know a decent amount of it was probably old, like decommissioned stuff.
It was definitely some kind of vintage, but it was, sort of bizarre, to have across from a bowling alley just like camped out.
Yeah. It was a little bizarre. Oh, we have a little military base in town. Okay.
Right. Like, what?
Yeah. No, I know exactly where you're going with that. But yeah, so this right here is if you go to this, and I'll get obviously the link in the description. But this is information that NHPR released about budgets, and the raw data, as it says here, is available through the New Hampshire Public Finance Consortium. And basically, if we start to look at the numbers, right, like the thing that jumps out to me first off is that police budget is over double, like significantly over double the fire budget. So I don't get that.
No. And it was also, I mean, just to bring it back to last night's discussion, like, we had the fire chief there, and like, there wasn't, like, a lot of the conversation is about policing, but like, that was also an opportunity to talk about emergency services, which I think fall into a slightly different category. Granted, like, there's work that needs to be done within those departments as well, but yeah, I mean, fire and safety, like, how are they half the budget, and it's a volunteer, fire department?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's, and then if you look over just a little bit, you notice that our public health budget is literally zero, which, and we were talking about this before we went on the stream, but obviously, like, that could be that we're rolling money from like what would be considered health into fire, which makes sense because Chief Walker is also the chief public health official in town, right? So that, like, logic would follow that's exactly what we're doing. So in a way, it makes sense that we see that as zero. I personally think that's, again, it's like obfuscating more granularity, which is like, why are we doing that? But then that also for me leads to like, well, why, if we're combining health and fire in the same budget, that means it's split even further between the two. And you bring up the great point of we have a lot of volunteer firefighters. So it's
And EMTs.
and EMTs as well. Yeah, and so and there are plenty of people in town, I mean, myself included, that will say, you know, like we don't have the public health stuff. I mean, we have the River Center, which is awesome, but that puts a lot of onus on a nonprofit, you know.
Well, and look at Cratchit Mountain that just, had to shut down the Greenfield campus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that I got that news late last night, and I not to totally pivot here, but I just think like that is such a perfect example of why we're trying to reallocate this spending, because you have a very critical human service for people that are no longer going to have that, and this constantly happens in the disabled community, that they are left to fend for themselves, that those families are left to fend for themselves, and yet our police are doing fine. I mean, granted, I don't know the inner. Obviously, we don't know the like you've been saying, the granularness of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Of that budget, but that's like a very concrete example of how we've failed our most vulnerable and continue to roll money into these police budgets in occasions where, like Ivy said, how many lost dogs, how many drunken husbands,
Right. And I hope to talk to the kids that are doing that work, where they're going through the police log every week and looking at, like, okay, this is all the times we didn't need to send a guy with a gun. Never mind like police or whatever, not necessarily defining what that job is, but yeah, exactly. It's like, how many times do we need to do with a gun there? And then, further, if we want to dig into the numbers, my real question is like, why is this so, why is this so drastic? You know what I mean?
And given, I think the chief said that it's been like not since 2006 was there like any sort of use of force, or so if there hasn't been an instance of use of force in 14 years, then why do we have police with guns? Like, I don't
yeah. Well, and then there's the other part of, I speaking with Nicole about doing the looking at these documents, and they pointed out to me that, like, right now the police are on skeleton crew, like,
right.
they one of the guys can only do one shift a week, and he can't even be out on patrol, like, and that further confuses me, like, okay, so what if they have so much more money, why are we not, why do we not have enough cops out here doing it? You know what I mean? Like, if you really are going to sink the money into it and you really are going to go in that direction, then I don't understand how that works, like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, for some reason Doug's comments are kind of replaying in my mind right now, and I don't know if you have that queued up, but I think he really kind of distilled
I didn't get the very beginning of his portion, but I actually do have the second bit, which I think actually was I think that actually might be the right note to end on, because I think that gets to the heart of a deeper problem that's going on here when it comes to not the racism of our cops, but the racism of our community.
Yeah.
So, I'll put that up now, and we can just listen in on it.
Hello, everyone. Again, Doug from Hancock, work in Peterborough. Sorry about the weird lighting. And listening to what people were saying, I want to say that, and I firmly believe that if there was an emergency at my house or on my person with my family, and I call 911, I have no doubt that police and fire department and first responders would respond real quick. I'm always, and working in summer camps and calling 911, they are always there. And that's not a fear that I have. in case of emergency. And I think, when talking about policing, the idea of, police doing the thing that they do really well is responding to an emergency. However, what my concern is not the emergency. It's the randomness of it. It's the they think that there might be trouble. That's the part that worries me. I believe it was I want to say Eddie talked about earlier asked about the training that they go through. And I talk a lot with people here in Hancock and people in Peterborough and just talks in Dublin with people wanting to talk about race. The one issue that all those places have is that they say there are no Black people to talk to. So when I think about the officers being trained, I wonder who's doing the training. And what are you talking about? If you're talking about dealing with issues of race in the department, and if people from out of state, out of town come in, what is that training? And are you actually doing it, I guess? And if there's a whole bunch of white people sitting around a table and you're talking about race, it's really hard. And it's really hard. Not that you can't. And I wholeheartedly, with my entire soul, want you to talk about race, because I can't be there. And if you want me to be there, I will be there tomorrow. And I will talk to you about race because I want this to happen. But I can't always be there. You have to talk about it. People on this call have to talk about it without a Black person in the room. You can't just say, oh, well, there's no Black person, so we're good. We're good. That's what's been happening for years. Talk about it. Say something about it. Stand up and say something, because I can't always be there. And other people on this call may not want to be there. So I highly encourage you, whatever training it is, look into it, get the best people out there as possible, and if it's a Black person, great. Person of color, great. If it's a white person, I don't care. Have the conversation. I think that's only going to help us all in the long run. And real quick, I just want to say my personal experience with, isn't necessarily with the police officers. It's with the people of Peterborough. It's with the people that, as I'm walking through Bell Tates, that follow me around. It's the people that call me the N-word at Harlow's when I'm working there. It's the people that lock their doors when I walk by. It's not the police officers. Why? Because I'm an upstanding citizen. I pay my taxes. I don't make any mistakes. So why would the police mess with me? It's not them. It's people that don't work for the police. It's people that look at me and say, oh, you are a threat because of the color of your skin. That's what makes me fearful in town. It's not the police. I hope the police will help me out. I'm worried about the people that are not the police. The ones that will look at me for holding a sign and say, oh, I see you. But those are the people that I can't put a sign on my car because they can follow me home. I can't put a sign in my yard because they'll see where I live. That's who I'm worried about. I'm not, I hope the police will be there because that's what they're supposed to be. But
Thank you, Doug.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's I think, ultimately, and he earlier in it, he's also talking about how he doesn't know if that cop is going to feel more upset because they feel attacked by what's going on to cops everywhere, and they feel like they're more sort of under the microscope. And I think that really speaks to how we deal with things as people here. You know what I mean? And I think he's absolutely right that it's a racism in the community problem. It's not first time we had a meeting, you know what I mean, in Putnam Park, there was somebody that drove by and yelled "White Lives Matter" at us. It was
I didn't catch that, but
yeah, there was
Shit.
yeah, like right early at the beginning of the meeting, I remember someone just shouting it out the window. I mean, I know there were some protesters across the street, so it might not have necessarily been at us, because
Yeah.
I think we were fairly innocuous at the time. But yeah, I mean, that is absolutely something that happens here. And so when I think about, like, yeah, well, let's talk about defunding the police as just a general practice of advancing society, right? Like, we just don't need to give money to an institution that's a monopoly of violence as much when we don't really have the violence that needs to be controlled as much. Obviously, you don't, and even in major cities, they'll say this: like, you don't get rid of detectives. You know what I mean? You don't get rid of people that literally spend their day and night tracking down problems. You know what I mean? Like, tracking down what happened. And like, that's actually, I think, a really I don't have a problem with that type of law enforcement personally. Like, I just don't. I know I have a problem
so long that it doesn't end in incarceration.
Right, exactly. You know what I mean? I think that, yeah, and that's obviously a totally different, like, I mean, well, not totally different, but it's like, it's a bigger
Another part of the conversation,
right, to get into the like, abolishing prisons. And like, and that's, I don't think defund will necessarily be a part of that conversation. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's a roots issue. But you know, it's like, I think it's really important for us to have the conversation just on a purely, like, are we spending our tax dollars well kind of a way, and are we creating a process by which we can all sort of see what's happening, or are we just are we hiding everything from the public? Not even necessarily intentionally. Like, it could be done to, you know, like, simplify a process.
Yeah, I think, you know, but like, as far as Doug is talking about, like, you know, or the defunding issue is like, that is a Rubik's cube that anyone can pick up and try to tinker with. What we're also not doing, and I find myself guilty of this a lot, is that it's so easy to focus on the police as an entity right now, and to shift our focus from our internal anti-racist work. And what we're seeing, and what is so critical to all of this, is that inner working of ourselves, is that we spend time dismantling our own racism.
Yeah.
Because just like we're doing that work, like, police have to do that as humans while also wearing the uniform.
Right. I completely agree. And to that end, I think doing, you know, like, it's the same thing. Like I think about it in terms of, like, if you're dealing with, like, mental sickness, right? There's usually two avenues that you are intended to explore at the same time. One is medication, the other is therapy, right? Yeah. And the way I look at it is like, okay, well, we can talk about defunding, and that's the mechanical thing of the system and how it operates, and that's, like, literally messing with the chemistry of operation. So that's like, you're taking the medicine, you know what I mean? But
it's the symptom, yeah.
Right, exactly. But it's not like, and if you only do that, you're still not dealing with the underlying issue, which is the racism. And in order to deal with the racism, you need to actually go to therapy for it, you know what I mean? And I oftentimes deal with this in a mental health context. I mean, from my own experiences alone, and just because that's the cipher that I can use. But I genuinely think, like, what happened last night was therapeutic for the town. You know what I mean? Like, and for anybody that watched, probably, you know what I mean? It's like, I hope people throughout the state watch that, or go back and watch it later to understand what experiences are like for people in a really, like, liberal rural town. You know what I mean? Like, that's very different from even Manchester or Nashua.
Well, it totally pulled the veil back. And I think, you know, and there were even a couple of people in that meeting that were, you know, clearly troubled that that so much of this focus was on our policing, and that we were even having this conversation. And I think it's because there's that individual unwillingness to address our own most gruesome, losing the words, but
Yeah,
I think
it's inner selves, I guess. You know what I mean, or like inclinations, maybe.
right. Like again, it's like it's getting fixated on the symptoms and not like saying like, hey, I have some shit to sort out, and I think the mental health example is so perfect because in my own life I've experienced this with my own access to therapy and medication, but also having friends that understand that medication or think that medication is the fix,
Right.
and they have to work in tandem or they don't work at all.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, just to, if we were to extend the metaphor a little bit, it's like you can go to therapy and you can take your meds, but if you don't actually have a decent support network around you, you're also going to face challenges. And I think that's the community part that we do when we go out, we talk to each other and we just work through it. And we, like, hey, you're stressed about having to read all these racists on Facebook. Like, like, let's talk about it. Let's get through it. Like, yeah, I'm dealing with it too. Like, it's okay, man. Like whatever it takes to have that depressurizing, that's an important dimension of it too. So yeah, I mean, I think like just, again, we can dig into numbers, but if we really want to solve the problem, we need to examine our own implicit bias and our own inherited racism, as it were, like societally inherited racism, and what the insular nature of a community like ours. Like, I think that's really the examination point.
Yeah, like I personally, and this isn't to get any sort of praise, but I started a list of like every racist act or thought I've committed in my life so far, and that alone was such a healing practice.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously a very difficult practice, but like we're in such a state right now where like we can have this rawness and like really, really use that to drive the momentum, because that's where this movement is going to fail, is like if we don't really get deep into ourselves and call ourselves racists, like acknowledge like we have racist tendencies and thoughts and actions and we do harm, like I think Leaf said in one of your previous segments, like that idea of like the harm that we commit, like that's so important right now, to be looking at that. And so I think it's a practice that it's not going to jive for everybody, and but it's really important to do.
Right. And all we can do is encourage it. Like, and
yeah,
say we're
like
here for you.
Same with therapy. Like,
Right.
All you can do is say like, hey, these resources exist. Like this is, these communities exist. Right now we're saying like our community is going to hold each other accountable. We had 67 people, I think, at most last night, which like, it's a small percentage of our town, but like the cross section of people that were there, generationally and racially and regionally, of life experience, like that was huge. Like I think that was my biggest takeaway, was like we have so many different community members that are involved with their communities, and that I think those satellites eventually just like will all kind of be beacons.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's cool how it's all coming together in this weird, distant time. So at any rate, I know you got to get going. I got to get going too. So we'll like cap it for today. We'll probably do another one at some point soon, as this is sort of like an ongoing it's an ongoing thing. But hey, man, it was really great to have you on today. Thanks for like setting aside the time to do it up.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, have a good one, Zach. I'll catch you later.
You too. Thanks.
All right. Yeah, bye. All right, everybody. So that was Zach Zalman Green. As always, total pleasure to have him on. We're gonna keep it rolling tomorrow afternoon. Got Ivy Van coming on to talk about her primary right now. There's Challenger coming up, so we'll get into those details on the Hillsborough 24 race. and just, you know, see what else comes up. We'll talk about it then. But, you know, for anybody who's managed to stick around, if you could go and support us on Patreon so that we can keep this whole thing popping off, as it were. And, you know, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and absolutely smash the like button, hit subscribe. Little bell will give you notifications for it. You don't even have to have a YouTube account. You just have to have Gmail, so far as I can tell. So at any rate, thanks everybody. Look forward to catching up tomorrow, and have a great day.